let you know when we're live.
Oh, who's moderating?
Francis.
Okay, perfect.
And it says we're live.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Romancing the Capital, our online version of the convention and the panels. I'm really excited to have a chat with Latinx authors. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. My name is Francis Rondón, and I'm here based in Ottawa. Priscilla, let's start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Priscilla Oliveras. I write contemporary romance with a Latinx flavor. I am Puertorriqueña, Mexicana, kind of Tex-Mex. My mom's from Puerto Rico. My dad's Mexican-American from San Antonio.
Great. Sabrina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sabrina Soul. I'm from Southern California, and I write contemporary erotic romance featuring Latina heroines. And I'm Mexican-American, and I come from a very big, extended Mexican family. So thanks for having me.
Okay, Liana.
Hi, I'm Liana de la Rosa. I write historical romance with a touch of spice. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a Mexican, so I have a very large Mexican-American family here in Arizona. And then I have a very large New Yorker family on the East Coast. And I'm excited to be here.
All right, Adriana.
Hi, I'm Adriana Herrera. I am Afro-Dominican. I was born and raised in Dominican Republic, and my family is all still there. I came on my own for grad school and stayed like 20 years ago. And I live in New York City.
Okay, nice to meet you guys. This is really exciting for me. I was born in Venezuela and moved to Canada as a child, so I grew up very Canadian. So I've got that. All my family is down there as well, and so it's really exciting to meet other authors that write with their Latina heroines. That's something that growing up, as much as I've loved romance, seemed to be like not enough of, and so I'm so excited to meet you guys, and also, which is also one of the reasons I started writing romance, was to have these Latina heroines that get involved in life. So I guess for those new to what you guys do or what we do, what is your idea of in your books? Like, how do you incorporate your culture into your books?
Okay. Are we just going to jump right in and have at it? I think for me, I started writing romance because I was a reader, but I will say, like, my first books, there were a lot of things that were wrong with them, but I think one of them was it wasn't until I started writing books with characters that were like my familia, right? And not that exactly like me, but that like were my friends that were part of my culture, that I felt that I kind of like turned a corner. I will say that I have had people that have asked me, well, if I'm not Latinx, am I gonna like really get your books? And I will say, I think across the board, romance is romance, just like love is love is love. So the culture is in there because it's a part of who the characters are. I write predominantly the hero and the heroine are Latinx, or at least one of them is Latinx. There's a Latinx familia involved in the story. But it's not. My hope is when readers finish a book, if they're Cuban, like the Navarros in Island Affair, then they feel like maybe they've touched base with a little bit of their culture, right? But if they're not, then they feel like maybe they've learned a little bit just along the way, or they appreciate it a little bit more in some way. But it's just a natural part of who they are. It's not a history lesson or a geography lesson. It's a romance. That part of what makes these characters unique, or any other character unique, or like what would make a vampire unique, right, is just their culture and part of who they are.
Yeah.
Adriana?
Yeah, so I like my thing is like I write romance full of people who look and sound like my people. So what I write is stories centered in the Afro Latinx experience, something that I mean I could find as a reader some Latinx characters in books.
Yeah.
And one thing that I felt like was missing was like more nuanced characters in books, like an understanding that Latinidad or the Latinx experience isn't a monolith. That there's people like me who are Afro descendant, who our culture is more centered in our African roots than it is on, like, let's say, European heritage, or like what that means, like things like there's different diasporas. That's something that I'm trying to explore a lot more in my stories now is, two Dominicans, one's that's first generation and one that just came from the States a few years ago, and what it means to be a Dominican born and raised in the US as opposed to someone that's been here for a couple of years, and being a Dominican or an immigrant in the US with the current immigration, like the current political environment and how that impacts life. So I write very centered on themes that are kind of like social justice things. That's just something that I explore in my stories. But it's it's kind of like going into a story where the dominant culture is my culture, and it's centered around and it pivots around those experiences. And I think what we do, all of us do, is that we really put out there that once you're in our stories, it's like the common things that make romance beautiful: hope, love, connection, community, family, found family, are all there for any reader.
Yes.
It's just that you get the texture of a different experience that's not like the experience that we've been trained to know and understand as like the common experience, which is not other cultures.
Yes.
That's my short answer.
Yeah, I agree. I think I love one thing that you said is that, like, within Latinidad, there's so many nuances, right? So even myself, like being in our house, we grew up with a mix of Puerto Rican and Mexican, and so for me, I meld those. But something I also have to be careful with, like with my first series, the Fernandez sisters are all Puerto Riqueña, and my mom is one of my beta readers. And so she checks like the accents in the Spanish and, like things like that. But one time like one of the track change notes that she gave me one time is the sisters, one of them, somebody said something in Spanglish. And she was like, Mira, like you can say it like this, right? But, and your cousins in San Antonio will say like this, but in Puerto Rico, we say this. And in our house, we use them interchangeably because we can, right? But to be true to the Fernandez sisters, Puerto Riqueña, first generation living in Chicago, I needed to make sure that that my Latinidad didn't kind of mix in, and I was true to them and make sure I used, the word that they would use, for themselves. And I think that's the beauty of adding Latinx characters, seeing more on the shelves, is seeing those shades and the nuances of what we bring to everyday life. We want to see that on the shelves, for ourselves and for our readers to be able to see themselves on the shelves as well.
Yep.
Yeah. I know that for me, that sort of specificity of Latinidad is really interesting. Things growing up in Canada, where it's a fairly small Hispanic community. And so growing up here, I kind of assumed that everything my family did was what all Latino people did. And sometimes it's just what Venezuelans do. And I remember just even something as basic as language. I was able to go to Mexico and work there for a few months. And one of the first things I realized is, like, I don't understand what they're saying. I'm like, I'm a native Spanish speaker. I grew up speaking Spanish. How come they don't know that when I'm talking about a torta, I mean a cake? I'm not talking about someone's sandwich.
Yeah.
And so it's just those little things that it's like, oh, they say it this way, and they don't, when I use a certain word, they don't know what I'm talking about. That's really so. Even that is kind of an interesting experience, and I like to kind of bring that into my stories of like, okay, no, not all Spanish people or
Right.
Latin people are the same, and there's this comedy that can come out of that.
I think I always try to give the example of like in the US, someone's gonna buy, they want a soda, they're gonna say, I want a soda, I want a Coke, I want pop, I want, right? It depends on where in the US you're from. So same thing under that Latino or Latinx umbrella, torta, bizcocho, queque, right? A whole bunch of things for cake, Sabrina,
So
you write with a lot of food. That I was immediately thinking about you.
Yeah, and that's a good example of just the differences, because I know Adriana has chefs in her books, and I have chefs in my books, but the food that they create are totally different. So different. So that's a good way of showing, not every Latino chef cooks the same.
Yeah.
And it's not just rice and beans.
Oh my gosh, really? We don't have tortillas on our table in Puerto Rico, right?
We have plantains, so it's
right.
Yeah, we don't have like spice. A lot of people expect we don't eat a lot of spicy, like the Mexican side of my family does, and even I have right now some Puerto Rican food in the freezer that I'm trying very hard not to cook because it's all fried and I'm trying to eat better. But even just because I'm Puerto Rican doesn't mean every day I'm eating rice and beans and plantains,
right.
three meals a day, kind of thing.
I mean, if you were in the DR, you would, but in the States, you don't. I grew up eating plantains every single day, but here I don't.
No. Yeah. So, funny story. When my girls were really young, I have 3 daughters, adults now, but when we went to Puerto Rico and we spent a week there with my abuela, maybe a little bit longer. By day 4, we came down out for lunch and she puts rice on the table, and my youngest, who, I don't know, she might have been 2nd grade, she looked at me and she said, Mom, rice again. I feel like we're on Survivor.
Yep, rice again.
So.
Liana?
I was going to say, so I write historical romance, and my stories are set in England. And it's historical romance is what brought me to romance, the genre as a whole. And when I started playing around with stories, I set it in England because that's where the majority of them are set. And my plan was always to maybe write a series set in a familiar location for readers, hopefully build a reader base, and then be able to branch off to different settings with different, characters and different times in history. So I'm still working on doing that. So I can't say that any of my characters in my current books are Latinx, but the world I have created is diverse because, Regency England and Victorian England was not as whitewashed as we're led to believe by a lot of historical romances that are out there. It was a much more diverse place. So I try to just reflect that in my stories. And there's, I have a Duke who's biracial, and his, dual heritage plays a role in the story because it would have at that time, while he dealt with his different identities and how that came into play. I've had, I guess in every book, there's always been at least a side character who's different, who brings something different to the table because that was the real world. And I don't want to, write about a society through only one gaze, and the gaze that's been, I guess, perpetuated to be default when it wasn't. So I do have actually Latinx heroines and heroes in other stories I've written, and maybe one day I'll get to share them. But so far, this is, my stories have been set, in England with predominantly white characters at this point.
What I guess my next question would be like, what got you started in romance, or what brought you to romance, and also like, what's your favorite trope?
Oh.
So I'll start. My mom was a big romance reader. I remember, books. She would just not just buy one book; she would buy like 10 at a time from the grocery store, or we'd go to the used bookstore and she'd take a box and then she'd come home with a box. So probably when junior high-ish, that's when I started reading her books in secret. Um, it's not because she never said you can't read those, but I just felt like with the covers, maybe this is something I shouldn't be reading. um, and then I kind of stopped reading romance for a while. Actually, when I was in college, I was branching out reading different things. And then I came back to romance later on, like in my 30s. And that was because I had a friend who was actually being published in romance. And so being a writer, being an author was something I had always wanted to do, being a published author. And so I had started asking her, how do I do this? And she's like, oh, you join RWA, you go to this group, you do this. And so she was kind of like my door into reading more romance, because that was the number one thing that she said. You have to be reading what's out there. You need to see what people are talking about in the genre if this is what you want to do. So that's how I started. And as far as my favorite trope, I love fake marriage, fake engagement, fake boyfriend, girlfriend. That's my crack. I just love that so much. So any book that has that, I'm going to be reading it, because I just love it. You have one? So yeah, so that's how I started in romance.
I could go. I like, obviously as a kid, right? You read like the Babysitter Club and all those, and then I graduated to Victoria Holt Gothic novels. But my first romance was actually one of my dad's. My dad is a huge romance reader, romance watcher. I had never seen K-drama until my dad was watching some K-drama, and I, caught some snippets of it a while before. But I actually read my first Harlequin romance. We were in a hurricane shelter in the Keys, and like by day 2, I was bored out of my mind. And my dad, part of his hurricane supplies was a bag of romances, and he just said, "Take one of mine and read it, like get out of their hair." So I just started reading then. And I wrote my first, or I started writing romance the first time I was in college, and young wife and mom, military spouse, and we moved, and I had to take a semester off of college, and I needed something to do like for myself other than just be home mom, because I went from full-time student and mom and I had the same thought that a lot of other people think. Well, I like to read books. My major is English. I'll just write one. It'll be so easy. But so I just kind of continued from there. I found out about RWA a couple years later, but I will say it took me 26 years from the first time I typed on my handy dandy electric typewriter chapter 1 until I signed my contract with Kensington, my first contract. So 26 years of reading, exactly. That's what I tell any of my students. If you want to read mystery, if you want to write mystery, romance, whatever, you got to be a reader. And learning craft. I would say, talking about craft, my favorite trope is probably friends to lovers. I think it's mostly that angst of, are they going to cross that line? Like if they have a really good thing right now and they cross that line and it blows up, then they're left with nothing. So to me, it adds like a little bit more of that angst. I'm not a risk taker either. So I'm like, oh, are you sure you want to do that kind of thing? So that's the one that will kind of grab me.
I came to romance on visits. I grew up in the DR in the Dominican Republic, but every summer I would come with my grandmother, my dad's mom, to visit family we had in the Bronx and in California. We had some family in San Diego. And my cousin who lived in San Diego was a nurse. She worked the night shift, and she read romance to fall asleep when she came back from work. and she had like just like stacks of them in her bedroom, and I would just like read them when she was at work, and then I would just like buy a bunch of them at Walden Books and bring them home with me to the DR. I would bring like a whole suitcase of them. And my favorite trope, probably, I wouldn't say enemies to lovers. I don't like super like contentious like things like aggression in a way that like gets. But I do like a good rivals to lovers romance. Like people, I love like competence porn. Like I like two people who are incredibly good at what they do, and they're just like very competitive and like trying to like do something, and then they're also like making out. Like that's my favorite.
I haven't heard rivals to lovers. I like that a lot better than enemies. So that's good. That's good. Thank you.
So I started. I honestly cannot remember the first romance I read. I don't know. I know that in our house, my parents' house, they had huge bookshelves filled with books, and like randomly, I came across, and I'm pretty sure I still have some of them on my own bookshelf. Like the Harlequin Presents or the Harlequin Silhouettes, and I was like, oh, and they would be in that clinch pose, and of course, my young mind was like, well, what is happening in this book? And so I think that's how I started reading them. And no matter book or movie, TV show, if there is a hint of a romance in it, that's instantly my favorite part. Like I want, everything could be blowing up around, and I just want to know that those two people are gonna get together. So that better happen. So I started writing it. Similar to Priscilla, I was a new stay-at-home mom. I had a 2-year-old and a newborn who's very colicky, and I didn't realize it until later that I had a serious case of postpartum depression, and I read romance novels like one after the other because it was like the perfect escape. It was I read so much romance during that time. And I still remember, I shared this story before, and I actually shared it with Sarah McLean. I had just finished reading her novel, No Good Duke Goes Unpunished. And at the very end of the novel is like this big reveal about the next heroine of the book. And it blew my mind. I was so excited about this reveal that when my husband came home, he was like, how did the day go? I'm like, the kids are fine, but let me tell you about this book I read. And I like pushed to him about the book and like what happened. He patiently listened to me talk about it. And he goes, why don't you write your own book? And literally, that's what started it. I think I found out about RWA a few days later, and I joined. I didn't know anybody, and I joined. And I started scribbling with ideas. And it gave me a much needed outlet where I was not just a mom, I was a person completely separate. Like I was my own person, and I could create my own worlds. And so I want to say that was in 2013, and my first book came out in 2017. Wow. And I'm still the kind of reader that I gush and get excited over other people's books, and I still want, I still watch movies wanting them to get together. Right now, I'd say my favorite tropes kind of change. I'm very much into rivals to lovers, like Adriana said. Like, I want that angst where they're, both competing against each other, but they also really have a crush on each other, but they don't want to admit it. I just love that. And all the witty banter, give it to me.
Yeah. Well, high five to your husband.
Yes, he's pretty great.
Yeah, I know for me, like romance is something like I always loved reading, even as a kid. The Nancy Drew files and Sweet Valley High, all that stuff. And I remember I couldn't afford like books as such, and so I had this part-time job after school, and literally on my walk to this job, I would pass this used bookstore, and of course the Harlequin Presents were at the time were like $3 for $1, and so I was like, that was like cost effective. I'm like, I could get like a couple hours for 30 cents. Oh, I am all in on this, and then I just became totally hooked. And so every time I get my paycheck, I'm like, all right, let's see what's at the bookstore, and no, that was sort of how I started, and then. expanding from there. And I did read a lot of historical romance. I love that as well. And for me, I'm a bit of a science nerd. I freely admit I was on my like high school robotics team, and so I love characters that are nerds and competent. So I definitely like the rivals to lovers, and second chance. For some reason I love people that screwed up, and you're like, you know what? They've learned from it and they know what they want now. So I love a good second chance romance. So for me, in my books, and I'm fairly new. Like it's taken 25 years of reading to start the writing. I do paranormal and steampunk romance. So for me, it's like, okay, let's get I like the science in there. I like competent people, and but yeah, no. I think for me right now, my favorite trope is the second chance.
Nice. Okay.
So I guess another question I have for writers that have more books under their hat. Which character of yours was the hardest to write?
Oh.
I would say probably my third book, Patrice and Easton. I write queer romance too, so like the first two books in my series are 3 gay romances. So it's the third book, and it's a book that really centers around like Black Lives Matter. So Patrice is a Haitian professor. He's also a Black Lives Matter activist, and his love interest is a prosecutor who's white. And so there's like racially motivated traffic stops in the town that they live in. And so that's kind of like the conflict for them. And so that character was hard to write because Patrice like had to strike a balance between a heavy subject and really like having the romance be the center of the story, and also kind of trying to shine a light on like the fatigue that comes with activism and the fatigue that comes with feeling responsible as a person that's how we're burdened with like being the representatives of our communities or our identities. So like that was a hard character to write. It's probably my favorite book that I've written, but it was hard because it was a lot to balance.
Probably a lot of emotion for you as the writer, then getting inside the character's head, that dealing with all of that emotional, turmoil. That's pretty
yeah, and also like having it still be a romance, because I didn't want the heavy subject matter to kind of weigh down the fact that it was about them falling in love, and like I had to give the story a viable HEA. So that one was tough, but I think it's the book I'm proudest of, even though I love Dream Life.
I'll say for me, the hardest book has always been the second book in a series. In my first series, the second book was Her Perfect Affair. And Rosa and Jeremy are two really good people. And Rosa has shades of my middle daughter. And so I was having a really different plotter, like you outline, you kind of have like your story all mapped out. Pantser will have more towards, they have an idea and they have some characters and they just sit down and they start writing and trust and just go with the flow. So I tried to do that. And I lost like 3 months of my life that I'm never going to get back because I was doing everything but sit down to write. And it took my agent to say, okay, we need to have a talk. Like your deadline is coming. And so all around what I had to do was be meaner to my characters. I had to like disassociate Rosa from my middle daughter, whom I want all good things for, right? And I needed to accept my process and what had worked for me, the 25 odd years that I'd been trying to do this to become published, what I had learned and what had worked, and be true to my process. So I think it was just writing that book as a whole. It was the characters were so nice. I just wanted them to be happy together, and also being, again, like trusting my process, and what works for you is good. That works for you. What works for her, maybe something you tell me I tweak to my process, but I needed to stick with what helps my muse or what helps me.
So I think for me, I don't know if I found it difficult as I was writing it, but more so maybe looking back. The first book in my Delicious Desire series, the heroine comes back to live with her parents and run their Mexican bakery. And so it was a challenge to kind of balance that she's a grown woman, but at the same time, she defers to her parents and what they want, what they're asking of her. And I did get criticism from some readers that, how could she not stand up to her parents? How come, she let them control her life? And so, not all Latinx daughters are obedient like that. I understand that, but it is an experience that, some of us do share, that if your parents are saying this is what you need to do, it's easier just to do it than, to argue, because they're just going to win anyway. But I think that is a balance in trying to, in just an overall balance. And then this is not an overall description or experience of a Latinx daughter, because everybody has, like, as we were talking about in the beginning, everybody comes from different backgrounds. Everybody has different family relationships. Not all of us are close with our parents, but yes, there are some of us that do. My mom lives 5 minutes away from me. I talk to her every single day. So that was just my experience. So I think looking back, it is a challenge in trying to balance what readers' expectations are of some of our characters and what our own experiences have been.
Honestly, I don't know that I had a character that's been the most difficult to write. I feel like every character is difficult to write. Every time I'm in the book, I'm like, how am I going to make this work? And is he, is he going to be good enough for her? Is she going to, forgive him for that? Like every single book, I get to the end and I'm like, well, this is terrible. So, and then I look back on them later and I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Like that, I forget, kind of like with childbirth, where you forget how painful it was after they're born. That's how I feel with every book. But I'm finishing up a book right now that it feels like every scene I've had to squeeze blood from a stone. So right now it's these two characters in my current book that have been the hardest to write. So that's probably a cop-out answer, but that's really what I feel in my soul.
At the same time, I think that's happening with a lot of people. Like I would say, writing right now has been really hard. Mm-hmm. And typically I don't have a problem. Like Sabrina, your mom is 2 minutes away. Mine's 20 steps away because we all live together. So usually I don't have a problem putting on my earphones, and falling into my story world. But I'm even by myself right now, social distancing alone because they're with different familia. So there's no distraction but I sit down to write and I turn on the music and it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I have an ansiedad, what is that? An anxiety, right? But in a lot of author groups that I'm in, we're talking about that, right?
It's hard to focus.
Yeah, just and so I think that's for a lot of us. If I was being truthful, I would say yes. The book that I'm writing right now is oh my God, the gray hair, because of this book. But I guess whether it's misery loves company or not, but to share with you that I think you're not alone in that right now.
Yeah, I just I feel a lot of mental exhaustion. I tend to write at the end of the day, and by the time that happens, it's hard. I'm this close to just sending it to my editor and being like, "Help me! This is your job.
Let me help
Here
you."
is yes, I here are some words. Help me make them pretty.
It's hard right now. I'm a therapist. That's my day job. I'm a trauma therapist, and so I have I have training to be able to find ways to like manage anxiety and and intrusive thoughts around negative thoughts. But still, like it's hard to like I'm finding it hard. Even a 25-minute sprint, it's hard for me to stay in it, and my mind not drift. So I think it's just the time. There's a lot to be worried about and not a lot to be distracted with.
Right. And I saw a thing like on the internet about how like, and so Adriana, you could probably speak to this, like when there's a traumatic event, like it happens and then it's the aftermath, you're trying to get through it. And but what we're in right now is like, it's continuing and you don't know when it's going to end, which just kind of makes it like a different kind of a longer lasting traumatic event. So,
Yep.
We're
still in it.
So. Yeah. I kind of want to go back. Can I ask Sabrina a question? Or like, I thought something that Sabrina said, just to kind of get us back to like the Latinx aspect of it, was how you got some feedback about the daughter needing to stand up to her parents. And it made me think a little bit about that's an issue in like all kinds of cultures. Like if you watch a K-drama and that's happening with the heroine, in a lot of cultures. So to me, that would be something that as a reader, I would have been interested in exploring, like those aspects. I think the commonalities of even some things that we would say like are common in Latinx culture, how they are also common within other cultures as well. Kind of they tie us. That wasn't really a question, but
well, you can stretch that to like historical romance. Readers will be like, oh, well, a heroine would never act that way. Women would never have sex outside of marriage. There would never be sex clubs. LGBTQ people couldn't possibly be happy during Regency. I think a lot of people come at it with these ideas, these preconceived notions of how history was, or how they think people should react in certain situations, which is grossly unfair.
Yeah, and unrealistic.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We do have a question from one of the viewers. Catherine Laurels has asked, have you ever created a character smarter than you and then you don't know how to do them justice? I can start with that one. Yes. My recent book that I released, my main character is a chemist, an inventor, and so definitely smarter than me. And also the way I had written her was that she's so focused on science and her work that she doesn't quite know how to relate to people. So because of that, I'm like, well, I definitely had to do a lot of research to figure out, okay, what is she inventing? And is it even remotely plausible my story is like a futuristic steampunk world. So I had to kind of be very narrow focus and like, okay, it has to be mechanical, or chemistry still works, but it can't be like gas powered or anything. So that was an interesting kind of character sound is smart. What was smart actual chemists will think about what I'm creating.
I think it comes down to like what you're interested or what I'm interested in researching, right? Because there are a lot of jobs. So whether, I had one character that they were in hotels and like land development. And my first thought was that maybe he was going to be like an app developer. And then I realized like, I don't know anything about app development. And I'm not really interested. If someone said, hey, here, read this article about app development, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's okay. So he obviously changed his career then into something that either I was interested in researching or that I knew somebody who was in that career field that I could kind of bounce some ideas off of. So I think there have been a lot of characters that are in other areas that I'm not familiar with. Jeremy's in cybersecurity. So then you go online and you're researching or you're talking to people that are in that field so that you can learn their lingo, learn kind of like their perspectives, that, that kind of. So I've probably had several characters that are smarter than me in one way or not, in their field or anything like that. But it just comes down to being able to crawl inside their head to get them, on the page in a way that is believable for them. So then it goes back to research.
I think, honestly, I read a lot of social workers and a lot of therapists because that's what I do. And I'm really interested in the idea of bringing mental health conversations to stories that have Afro-Latinx characters. So, I mean, of course, all my characters are smarter than me. They're amazing. I write them, so I know they're super smart.
They're like fabulous people.
And brilliant, all of them geniuses. But I mean, for me, I think honestly, like one of the things that I try to do is, what I like to do is like, I like to place Afro-Latinx people, like Black people who are Latinx, in places where they are not usually in fiction, and doing things that they're not usually doing in fiction, and having experiences that are not the experience that we traditionally see people with those identities, like a Black queer woman or a Black queer man thriving and excelling in a specific place or time that we don't usually see in romance. So that's where I kind of like dig into, like my latest book, American Sweethearts. Like the heroine is Dominican. She's first generation. She's a police detective in New York City, and she does special crimes. So she does like survivors of sexual violence, like people who have like experienced like sexual violence and domestic violence, because that's the field that I work in. So I understand like her work a lot. And she's super, but I don't do a lot around her work. I do a lot more around her conflict in terms of what she actually wants to do is to be a sex educator in Afro-Latinx communities and do like work around sex positivity and education with underserved populations, like over 65, the disabled, non-binary folks. So I think for me, it's more about like, I don't dig too much into the like minutia of the profession, and more around the like how my character as a person who's walking in a body that's a certain type of identity would like travel that type of like life and work and career. So that's where I focus more on, not so much into like, so far. I mean, maybe I'll like decide I'll do like a nuclear engineer in my next book, but so far it's more about like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be a Haitian, like a Black queer man who's an Ivy League professor? And what that means, like what, and like how that those intersections impact someone who is not someone that is usually in that place. Like you don't see a Black man when you think about an economist.
That's right.
Fiction would tell you it's not a Black man with dreads, you know? So that piece of it is what I explore in my books more than the actual like minutia of the profession, if that makes sense.
But I think that's the value of more Latinx books, is that how when you think the stereotype, like you just said, of like an economist professor, right? Everybody thinks this stereotype, but the more, that's why there's a call for more of our books, whether it's Latinx romance or just Latinx, like diverse, books in general, to kind of blur that stereotype into to see more color and more and more variety in the world, because on the shelves, because it's there in the world, it just hasn't had an opportunity to be there on the pages like it should be. And so,
right.
I don't even remember the question now.
The question was, have you written characters smarter than you?
Yes.
And is I think, you find it like, can you, which one, I guess which one or which ones, or who's your favorite?
Well, I don't know if so much that maybe she was smarter than me, but she was definitely cooler than me, would be the heroine in my third book. She was a chef, and she was so I wanted her to be this very spirited, independent, I don't need a man type of woman. But of course, you know, she did want a man. But so it was just more of doing her justice in showing that, you know, just being her banter with the love interest, and just that push and pull of, I don't want him, but I really do want him type of thing. And just thinking that by being with him, that was somehow going to take away some of her independence. So that was just a little bit of a challenge, but I definitely wanted her to be super, super fun and cool. And so that was maybe a little bit of a challenge as well, because totally not my personality. So.
Liana?
I feel like all my characters are smarter than me. But if I had to choose one, the heroine of my third book, To Tame a Scandalous Lady, was a horsewoman. And I had set that up way in the first book. And then when it came time to like plot out her story, I'm like, okay. And, you know, I started plotting it out and I realized, oh my gosh, I know almost nothing about horses, horse training. And my husband walked in the room one day and I had up like a whole diagram of like a horse's body and like what to call it all, because if you're working on horses, shouldn't you like rest your hand on the appropriate part of the horse? And I had no idea what to call anything. So I was like frantically doing all this research, and I would like watch horse trainers, like how they would approach like a skittish horse, or how they get them used to like, you know, now we hear a gun crack, right? And they open the gates and they go racing out of the gates at like the Kentucky Derby. They didn't do that, you know, in 1832 England, like they were on a grass pad. But I did all this research, and I tend to do that to myself a lot, where I decide way in advance, my character is going to do this. And then when it comes time to do it, I'm like, I know nothing about this. So here we go. Let's go find out everything we can. And then my editor inevitably is like, you need to cut some of this.
Yeah.
No one cares about that. Like, you should cut that. I'm like, one day my knowledge of horse racing will come in handy. And just like I had a heroine, like I have a series set in Nepal, so I know a ton about mountain climbing. And one day that will come out, and
You'll go mountain climbing.
Yeah.
Mountain climbing. Yeah.
Yes, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the things I learned trying to make my characters, because that I think it was Adriana said the competence porn. I love it. So. The more I can do to make my characters experts in their field, the better. Even if most of it winds up cut by my editor, at least I know they know it.
What are some trends that you guys are seeing in romance that you like, and what do you want to see more of?
Trends are kind of hard because it just depends. If you're indie, then yeah, you can like write to a trend, as far as you can write and you can publish it as soon as but like the book I'm writing, that I'm finishing now, that if God is with me, I will finish like tonight when we're done, is not coming out until next summer. So if I'm writing to what's a trend right now, it might not be a trend next summer. So I can't, or I don't anyway. I choose not to like write to that. I choose more to like focus on like what is important in this story that the characters are telling me, or that, you know, and be true to that story. In general, I would just kind of say like what we've talked about is more diversity is what I want to see. More like, I think Adriana said it beautifully about, you know, having our characters from all these varieties of backgrounds being represented on the page. So like one of the best moments I've had as an author, I love, and so the isolation part of all of this is hard when you have a book out, because I enjoy going out and talking with readers and meeting readers and all of that kind. But when someone comes and says, gosh, the first time I really saw like someone like me or my cousins or my hermanas was like reading your series, it it's a wonderful moment, but then it also takes me back to like what you were saying earlier at the very beginning, how, when the books that we started out reading, there were some, right? When I was years ago, there was the Encanto line, and I loved, it was the first time that like it was a line dedicated to Latinx, culture, but it didn't last very long. So to me, a trend, if you want to call it a trend, but I don't really want to call it a trend. I want it to just be the norm, is more diversity in the books that we get to choose from, and we're seeing that. But I think we just need to keep seeing it and see more.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think it's been nice to see, that authors that we know are coming out with more and more books set in different places. Like I'm very interested in writing historical, because I want to write. The colonies is where I'm from. So like we were there, we were mobilizing the economies of Europe. And so we were not only in our places, but we were there too. So I think like to me, it's beyond just where we can be conceived as existing by the industry in like contemporary romance. My interest is like to be in every place, fantasy, historical, in every era, cozy mysteries. Like that's what I would love to see more of, where our presence is not an exception, but just the norm. It's, and in all the iterations of who we are as communities, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, everything that is Latinx, the Latinx community.
Yeah, and I would kind of go also like outside of seeing books, but I published by more Latinx authors. But it's also, I think in the last year or so, we've also been very deliberate about creating that community online. And so now for writers who are just starting out, there's somewhere to go. There's people to ask questions. I'll get a Twitter message, every once in a while asking me questions, and I'm happy to share my experience. And it just goes back to, I think in romance in general, we're a very supportive community, and it's not so much we shouldn't be competing with one another. And like I've told the story before. Priscilla knows the story, but I had given as I mentioned, my mom is a very big romance reader. She still is. So when I was going to the conferences, I would be bringing her books autographed. And so I gave her one of Priscilla's books. And she called me after reading it. And she was very concerned because she thought Priscilla was taking away my readers, because Priscilla had Spanish in her book. And here she was, this lifelong romance reader. And the first time she ever saw Spanish in a romance book was one of mine. So now here's this Priscilla coming, and oh my God, she's going to take all your readers. She's, and I'm like, no, she's not. So I think it's just we've become such a community that when there's opportunities like this one, where we need Latinx romance authors. Oh, I know some. Here's the names of people you can talk to. Here's people you should interview. And it's not because, we're trying to only be the one and only Latinx romance author. We want people to be writing more books like this. We want new writers to come in and join the community. And so when me and Priscilla and Mia Sosa and Alexa Staria, we started a readers group called Four Chicas Chat. And originally it had just started because of an article idea, right? Yeah. Were they going to interview you, Priscilla, or were they going to interview you?
Yeah, or it was with my debut. So I pitched an idea to HEA USA Today about would they, I figured as a debut that if I pitched an idea about interview me, they'd be like, yeah, whatever. So I said, well, I pitched like, what about a group? Like this is, a kind of, there are more of us out there. And, but before I reached out to them, I I reached out to you guys to say, hey, if I pitch this idea, would you want to do it? And so out of that, so we were all 4 interviewed, and that article kind of brought us together, and us talking about the article with each other ahead of time, we kind of connected. And so it was more like that desire to, like, we had found each other. There were more, like, we need, we need to help each other. Right. So like what Sabrina said, when she had, we like give shout outs to each other and be that voice, because one voice screaming out into the void is, but if the more we are together, supporting each other, helping each other, the louder it becomes. And the more successful we all are. Yes. Yes.
Yep.
But yeah, if you're out there, use that. We do a lot. I'll do like hashtag Latinx ROM on Twitter, on Instagram, to help each other find each other, to give a shout out if you've got a book coming out, if you're going to be on doing something like this, if you're, that kind of thing. Si se puede.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it's also like, I think the more of us that are out there, the more sort of range of stories that we get and read. And yeah, I mean, readers, especially romance readers, are voracious. And if they have something they like, they want more of it. And for me as well, like I grew up reading romance and I loved it, but definitely it would have been really nice 25 years ago to like have a whole slew of Latinx authors and see, characters like me on the page. That would have been fabulous. And so it's really great. And I mean, I'm here in Canada, so it's a bit, it's different. It's really nice sort of to get that, just differences. There's the experience in the US, and I know even a lot of my family down in South America, they kind of assume anything that is English is American, and so there's a lot of me explaining, well, no, there's Canadian Latinos as well. They exist.
But I think it's interesting if you just even look at our panel, that we're all Latinx, but even like our books are all shades different. There, you know what I mean? It's wonderful.
Yeah, and only we can tell our story like we do.
Right. Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end. So I just wanted to ask, so for a new reader of your books, which book would you recommend that they start with?
All of them. No. Okay. All of my books are standalones, so you could pick up book 2 or book 3 in a series, and it's a complete, from beginning to end story. I would say if you are someone who likes to read things chronologically in like a timeline, then I would start with book 1 in either my Match to Perfection series, like His Perfect Partner, or Island Affair is book 1 in the Keys to Love series. So it's Luis and Sarah's love story start to finish, so it's a complete story. You'll meet all of the Navarros, and in book 2, all of the Navarros will be there, and that's Ana Maria and Alejandro's story. Sarah and Luis will be in there, but they'll obviously already be together. So you can pick up any of them, but I would say if you want chronological, then Island Affair, which is out now, or His Perfect Partner is book 1 in the Match to Perfection series.
Yeah, with mine, I don't know. I guess they're all standalones too. For the Dreamer series, are all standalones. The last one is this one, American Sweethearts, and that one just came out end of March. And this is actually the only MF. It's Priscilla and Juan Pablo. It's I wouldn't say any of my books would ever be like full-on heterosexual people. There's always going to be queer characters in them, but this one is MF. The first 3 books are gay romances. American Dreamer, it's all set around 4 Afro-Latinx best friends who grew up together in the Bronx. So the first one is Nesta, who's Dominican. Second one is Camilo, who's Cuban Jamaican. Third is Patrice, who's Haitian. And this is the last one, and he is Puerto Rican, and she is Dominican. So we could start with that one.
So for mine, I have some novellas if you want to ease into some of my stories. So disclaimer, I write erotic romance. So they're lots of sex, steamy stories. But the first book in my Delicious Desires series is Delicious Temptation. And this is the book that I mentioned that the heroine comes back to help run her parents' Mexican bakery in East LA. So lots of Mexican dessert, good stuff in there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Lots of deliciousness.
Wait,
Lots of
reading the book.
deliciousness. Yes. Also, yeah, mine are high heat. High heat.
Yes.
Mine are like one jalapeno.
Sabrina and
They
I
have
are like
all the peppers. They have all the
ghost peppers.
Yeah.
So all my books are standalone as well. So you can pick up whatever one you want. This was my latest one.
Ooh.
And if you want to meet my horse training heroine, this is her. So she knows her way around the horse much better than I do. And her hero is also a horse trainer. So a lot of the action happens in the barn, but
Ooh.
and I would give probably like 3 jalapenos, maybe.
And I'm like, give me a seed. What if I want?
And then I have another book coming out in the fall, and it will be it's more of a political book in that the hero is standing for parliament, but I always do that to myself. I always have someone who's getting political, and I don't mean to, but it is what
I always mean to.
And did you say, Francis, we should put all of like the titles in case anybody needs to see it in the Facebook group, right?
Yes, yeah. That'll be great. For me, like I really just started writing last year, so I have a few novellas out. Basically, if you want steampunk, I've got one called Touch of Steel, and there's a second book in that series too. Or if you like shifter romance, I've got one in Millie Tatum's world, and it's a dragon shifter who meets her wolf shifter. Also pretty pretty steamy. There's some jalapenos there. All right.
Again, across the board.
Put up links we'll put up links. Thank you guys so much. It was fabulous chatting with you.
Yeah.
And good luck and if you have any final words and if there's anything you want to talk about or put links up to your websites or your
Mine, I'm Priscilla Oliveras, but there are a bazillion ways to spell Priscilla incorrectly. So my website, my Twitter handle, my Insta handle, it's all Pris, P-R-I-S, Oliveras. .com is my website, or just at Pris Oliveras for Twitter and Insta, and my author Facebook page as well.
Yeah, my website is adriana.romance.com, and I'm on Twitter at La Adriana Herrera.
My website is sabrinasoul.com, and I'm also on Twitter as @theromancechica. And also for readers and authors who are on Twitter, we also use the hashtag Latinx Rom, so LATINX ROM, when we're talking about other Latinx Rom authors and new releases. So definitely follow that hashtag. And if you're a Latinx Rom author who's watching this and we don't follow each other on Twitter, let me know, because I actually also curate a Latinx Rom author list on Twitter that we're trying to put everybody in there. So whenever some reader says, hey, who are the Latinx Rom authors, we got a list ready to go. So reach out, please.
And I'm on Facebook. I forgot to say, if you're a Facebook user for Chica's Chat, like the number 4 Chica's Chat, the 4 of us, Sabrina, Mia Sosa, Alexis, Daria, and I started, but it's all of our any Latinx Rom authors who are on Facebook, that it's kind of like our casa. Everybody come in, hang out, chat, talk, that kind of thing.
My website is Liana, Liana, inbloom.com, and I'm on all the things at Liana in Bloom.
Great. And I'm at ladies so much. Muchísimas gracias. And until next time.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Adios.
Viewers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.